Hey, good morning and welcome to a presentation on WebTools for GemStone Smalltalk. I'm James Foster. GemStone 64-bit version 3 includes a new goodie called WebTools with which you can easily interact with the running GemStone system through a web browser. So we're going to look at some of that. About me. Our agenda will look at some of the existing tools, then motivation for a new set of tools, demo, discussion of the design, how we can create a new tool, and some lessons learned from it. The existing tools, one is Topaz. Topaz is the primary built-in GemStone-esque user interface. It's used internally to create the distribution image, and it's kind of a favorite for those who are more of a command line oriented background. So our C developers that are used to working in Shell and VI or Emacs are quite at home with Topaz. It's used internally for testing and debugging. It can be scripted, so it's very useful for batch jobs, maintenance jobs, backups, and so on. And of course, if you can do a bug report using Topaz, that's especially nice because then we've eliminated more of the variables. Very analogous to a command line, you enter a command, get a response. There's run, do it, print it, execute Smalltalk code. The debugging capabilities are based on dumping stack frames, looking at values, observing things. But it's less comfortable for the typical Smalltalker who's used to a graphical user interface. Another tool that's been part of GemStone for a while is a visual statistics display tool. Stat Monitor is an application that ships with GemStone and captures hundreds of statistics about a running GemStone system. The capture utility produces a text file that is all kinds of data, and we recommend that production systems include running Stat Monitor at all times. It allows you to do analysis in event of a crash, and it allows you to do comparisons of performance from one year to from one time period to the next. And if you ever ask for support, one of the things that support will say is, send us your Stat Monitor files, and we'll help analyze the problem. The tool for viewing the Stat Monitor is VSD, which presents the statistics in a graphical format. It's cross-platform and has a fair number of capabilities. But it's TCL-based and requires third-party libraries on several platforms. It cannot run if there's a space in the executable path. So under Windows, you can't put it in program files because program files has a space in the word. It does run in Windows 7, but only if you enable compatibility mode and things like this. There's sometimes hard to read. There's file size limits. It's very useful, but a bit aging and cumbersome. Other tools, GemBuilder for Smalltalk. Of course, this is the primary user interface for using GemStone for most developers who are building the traditional client-server applications. It's an add-on library for Smalltalk, Syncom Smalltalk, and VA Smalltalk. Provides various tools, browsers, debuggers, and so on. But it is not available in the free version of GemStone, so you cannot use it there. Requires installation and use of yet another product. So here we are with another tool that needs to be installed. GemTools has been available for several years now, and it is the primary tool used for the free version of GemStone. Based in Pharo, and provides a number of useful tools: code browser, debugger, Monticello browser, now there's a Metacello browser. But it does require some specific server-side code, requires the installation of another product, and has many round trips to the server. It's based on OB, and that is quite chatty. So it's very, very slow, bordering on unusable if you're running on a hosted server that's on the network. Dale has said that even running from home a few miles from the office, it is essentially unusable. There's other tools that are out there. Jade is a Microsoft Windows application created in Dolphin, 1.3 meg exe that takes only about 8 meg of RAM, has a number of tools built in, and presents GemStone tools, but Windows only, another product, and it's unofficial goodie that I've been maintaining off and on for several years. So, those are some of the existing tools. What we would like is to provide a GUI that's lightweight, simple to install and use, and has minimal network and CPU usage. Cross-platform, presumably with minimal effort, as to whether your server is running on Mac or Linux or something else. And extensible, allowing the user to add on tools to it. And then, of course, experimenting with new technology is an interesting thing to be able to do. So, let's take a brief demo of this. And so what we're going to do is switch over to command line shell and say, make sure my Seaside system is running. So if I do a GS list, you can see we've got a stone running and there. If I go to Topaz and log in, so then I'm going to say input $gemstone. Let's see if I can. Examples. www.install and run.tpz. Okay, so what this has done is it has installed some code, the error count is 0, and we've run a server, and so HTTP Vienna is my laptop 8080. So we'll go back to the web browser and refresh on this, this website. So what we have is running a tiny web browser, or web server, excuse me, in GemStone, and there are a number of tools that have been presented here in this list. You can see at the bottom here, the request for the tool list was the first round trip that we made to the server, and this took 2 milliseconds on the server, 53 milliseconds on the network, and 2 milliseconds on the client. So this is information that we're just kind of capturing to keep some interesting. I make things a little larger, zoom. So first tool is going to be version report. And if you've used GemStone, there's a system version report that tells you information about the stone, what's running, where it's running, and the process ID for the stone, and the process ID for WebTools. all the information for here is the same. So that's just one sample little item. There's a current sessions list that shows the sessions that are currently logged in. And so this is current sessions, and description of session is something that most GemStone users are familiar with. So we can see how long something's been running. So this data curator session has been running for 2 minutes. It's the one we just started. But others have been running, the symbol user's been running for 14 hours. The commit record backlog is currently 1 for the symbol user. And you notice the symbol user is on the oldest commit record and the others are not. If we select any one of these lines, we get a page of information, cache statistics about this particular session. And so we're on our WebTools one. You can see it's a Topaz session. And we can look at such things as the gem temp object space size. So here we can see that we've got a 50 megabyte cache, temporary object cache. And we can get information, the value of the session's temp object cache size configuration parameter. So statistics there. We can also go to look at the shared page cache monitor. And so here we have information on the shared page cache monitor. For example, the number of frames, total number of frames in the shared page cache for my laptop is 31,000. And the free frame count, the number of unused pages, is 28,000. So at the moment, my system is not being taxed too heavily. So that's all to the good. Again, you can look at stone statistics and various other processes. So that's some session information. Code browser is interesting. Here I've followed the more traditional model for building user interface browsers. So just trying to make it look like a familiar Smalltalk code browser. If we go to user globals, we can go into the category for announcements, core, announcer. If I edit the class and put in a typo and then Control S for saving it, it says you have an invalid pound sign at this location. So we have a problem there, so we'll go ahead and fix that. Add a new class with a new name, and it shows up in our list of classes at this particular location. Right-click provides menu items, including removing, so we'll remove that class because we don't really need it at this point. Then, if we select a method category, a method, we get our list of methods. We can right-click again for context, browse implementers of the announce method, and so there's a variety of classes and categories. Yes?
Do you cache that on the client side, or is it all around it?
We are running in a Topaz session on a server, and the web browser is simply running JavaScript. And so there isn't what you would traditionally call a client side and a server side. Unless by client you mean the web browser. And there is certainly information we're displaying in the web browser so that you can tab back over to here, and we haven't actually, this round trip 25, and we're still on, we haven't had to do another request to view this. Okay? So here's a list of implementers. We can look at senders of announce, and there's a list of senders. We can also look here, if you can see, there's underlining on various of the selectors. And so if you select one of these, or context click on one of the selectors, we can see that as announced is step point 2. We can look at implementers of as announced, and so here's a list of the implementers of as announcement. Again, we can edit here if we create a typo and try to save it. 2 periods in a row gives an error. We're expecting a statement. Yes?
I usually program with more than one code browser at the same time. So
yes.
Are you suggesting to a different web browser open?
You certainly can have multiple web browsers if you want. You could alternatively go back here and start up a second tab so that we can have a browser here that's on a different class. And so we've got this one on announcer and this one on array. Yes?
Is it possible to have these tabs in real browser tabs?
So if you'd like, you can go to start up a second session and open, another code browser. So here we've got a code browser in that tab and some in this tab.
Okay.
So different options there. Okay, if we're here making some changes, I'll go ahead and remove that extra period, say add a comment. We have syntax highlighting is all happening while you're editing. If you were to tab away from this field and say, you've made some edits, are you sure you want to lose them? If you say cancel, we can stay there. Or if you click away and say OK, then it just moves off to the new area. If we can go on to our other one. If I look at abstract exception, for example, there's client-side categories and methods. So within different categories, there's a different list of methods that are in these categories. You can also go to a variables list and say which methods reference the current GS handler. And so these are the methods that do that. We can also look, at some superclasses. So here is a list of the superclass chain for array. And so I can say sequenceable collection, collection, and object. If I pick sequenceable collection, then my list of categories and methods is updated. So now I see all the methods that would be included for this receiver from this point. And if I pick one such as add, there's another drop-down list here that says who implements this method. And so this method is implemented in array, which is the one we're looking at. We can also look at this method in sequenceable collection, and we can look at this method in collection. And so can just find our way through the various places that implement the various things. So that's a brief tour of the code browser. Statistics is something that allows us to look at VSD or StatMon data. So StatMon data for this particular file that I have already loaded includes a list of processes. So for example, the shared page cache is one of the processes that's running for which we're capturing statistics. And we can look at the PID here is a operating system process, we can look at an active process count. So how many processes are attached? And actually see that as we hover over the line, we get a description of it. The number of active processes attached to the shared page cache. And so the minimum is 1, the maximum is 112, the average is 27. If you've used VSD, you may recall that you have to actually open and graph it to get just this basic information. And here we've got, it in a textual format, but you can also then graph it and see the active process count. So at 2,300 hours, the active process count is, quite low. If we hover over it, we can get, so there's 1, here there's 9, here there's 18, but by, the middle of the day, there's 112 active processes. So here we've got some information. Active processes. Then other things that might be interesting, close too much here. In the shared page cache monitor is the free frame count, often something that people need to monitor. Again, we can see the minimum is 42,000, the maximum is 400,000. And kind of a typical use is, in the middle of the night, it's 400,000. And otherwise, we just kind of hover right around the target of about 50,000 for a free frame count. So this shows us how things are being used in the shared page cache. We can look at stone statistics. Commit record count is often something that we want to look at. Commit record count represents the CR backlog, what people are there's commit records that are being held onto and not released. And this is, in GemStone, a bad thing. We'll actually discuss that in the next section. Typically, what you would do is see this commit record count as being high and then go look for oldest CR session, try to figure out, lining up the graphs, who has the oldest CR session. And we can go look at we can go look for oldest CR session and see that it changes. At one point in time it's session 11, at another point in time it's session 15, and so on. But actually, one of the things we've done is, as part of loading the processes, we're actually have a column here of max CRB. So this session is responsible for the commit record backlog. And so, for example, this gem right here is responsible for the max commit record backlog growing to 15,744. And so this is a quick way of just finding which gem it is that's responsible for this problem. And then you can go in and look at the abort count and see that it was doing aborts, but essentially stopped doing aborts at 4 a.m. in the morning and didn't do any more until 10 o'clock. But that's the aborts. We also want to look at the commit counts and see if they were doing any commits. And similar story. They just stopped doing any commits. And so then you kind of ask yourself, does that mean they were quiet, or does that mean they were busy? And so typically you would go to something like page reads. And so, that'll give us an idea of whether there was activity during this time. And so the fact that there was activity from 4 a.m. to 10 a.m. without any commits tells us that this is a long-running job that's very busy, that is building up a commit record backlog. And so Having analyzed this, then we just say, well, that process needs to be rewritten so that whatever it's doing. And in discussing with the developers and users, yes, we confirm that this is a batch job that logs in at 4 a.m. and loads lots of data, does lots of analysis, and writes out a text file analyzing the data. And it's kind of, well, this is causing your problems. This is where your commit record backlog is occurring. So that gives us some view of what can be done with analyzing statistics through a web browser with the system. We have a rudimentary workspace, 2 plus, display it, Control D, well, we expected a little bit more, so let's say 2 plus 3, and display it, gives us 5. We can say 100 factorial, and that gives us, some number, which if we say print string size, it tells us that's a 158-digit number. We can say 3 foo and do it, and it says, well, a message not understood occurred, which is error 2010. Small integer does not understand foo. Would you like to debug this process? And so you can say yes, and we open up a new tab for a debugger that says message not understood, and we have our stat where we can go in and say, well, here's the code we're executing, and if you can see, there's some yellow highlighting for this is the method that's currently selected. And so the does not understand, we can tell which step point we're on. If we right click, we're there, we can see we're at step point 7. And here are various temporary variables, self. Sometimes actually the receiver and the self are different. So here it's a workspace and the receiver is an executable block because we're in the middle of a complex block. So that gives us some capabilities there. Workspace, then finally, object log. Object log, and, because I have the font larger, is showing multi-lines, but this is the object log that is available that things get dumped into, so we can see that part of this system was loading Gopher Core, loading Monticello, loading UTF-8, and so on. And so here's a series of things. One of the things that we can do is we can pick, if the object log contains a continuation or an error, we can go back into it and say, this was a particular continuation, and so we can step through it and see where the code was and what the values were at the time that error was dumped to the log. So that is a demo of WebTools, and let's see, I think. So the design of the system, the code is in GemStone. The code that's in GemStone is a web server, and again, yet another web server. This is not using Swazoo or something else. This is just one class with a couple dozen methods. Very lightweight, designed just for this. It's not a general purpose server. But just this way, you can just install this and run it, and it serves files in a particular directory, examples/www, and its communication with the client or with the browser is using JSON. So there's methods that get sent, called on the server, and it will reply with JSON. It will also look for a class and a method based on the URL that you provide. So each tool is represented on the server by a subclass of a particular abstract class and has some required methods. The files in the distribution or product tree in the examples www, general HTML files in the root, JavaScript file and /scripts, CSS and /CSS, and so on. Generally, files are named based on class, and then the HTML for the tool is obtained by making an AJAX call and then adding it to the page. So, why not use Seaside or something else that's out there? And this was a question when I started this almost a year ago that was, tried some prototyping in Seaside, but decided I wanted to do more of a lightweight process, not serving HTML code from Seaside, but just sending JavaScript, or using JavaScript and sending JSON back and forth. It was interesting, I presented this first at Smalltalk Solutions, and I did so just after Avi Bryant had a keynote talk where he made the argument that the traditional tools that we have for web applications are not very current. That the old model of get post with HTML is not the current approach. That the better approach now is to be using AJAX and JSON and sending things back and forth. That rather than keeping state on the server, which is one of the things that Seaside does well, if you can design a stateless application and just have async requests where you don't have to save state on the server, but just keep things in a stateless way in the browser. So this is, I don't know what a framework would look like that would support this, but this is an experiment in working towards that sort of model. So we'll take a couple minutes and look at how you would add a tool here. And so we've looked at, we have a version report, but one of the things that might be handy is have a configuration report. What were your config parameters for your stone? So let's look at this and say there's going to go into GemStone product examples, www, and then go to my GemStone source code and take our version report, and I'm going to open that with a text editor. And I'm going to go through this and say, change version report to configuration report. Actually, before I do that, I should save it as a new file. So save as, this is going to be configuration report.gs. And then we'll change version report to configuration report, replace all, and then step through, and this gives us a chance to look at the code of class methods, information about, configuration information about the stone. Okay, is the description and display name. configuration report. We'll put this at the end of the list. And then stone configuration report. So here particularly is kind of the crux of what code do you have to write on the server to send to the client. And so you have a method named JSON, and it answers a dictionary that contains key and some values. And in this case, we're going to return a configuration report. So we will save that method. Then we're going to go and do a similar thing with take our version report.html, make a duplicate of it, and call that configuration report.html. And then we'll take that, open it in our text editor, and then just run through looking at this. Now, this is a trivial example where I'm actually mixing HTML, CSS, and JavaScript all in the same file, which is arguably not a very good approach, but it allows me to take this, 40-line, 50-line file and just edit it and handle it all kind of in one place. So we're going to add a tab called configuration. And it's going to show the stone configuration. Okay, so this is JavaScript that's going to run at the beginning. And it's saying add a tab to my tools that does this. And so we'll call it a configuration table. And we'll call the class named configuration report. So GemStone Ajax get configuration report. And when you got some data, then we'll just go through it for keys and values and say create some HTML that has the key and the value. And we can put out the key and value information in a row, add that on. And then we're going to have a little bit of other stuff, including our CSS. We'll have a configuration panel. Configuration panel once. GemStone configuration report. And information for the stone. And then we'll have a table that will get generated. That's the configuration table. So let's save that and see. One more place we need to edit is we need to edit our install script, since now we have a new tool that needs to be installed in GemStone. So configuration report.js. So let's go back, log out to close the socket, log in, and try inputting install and run. Okay. Our error count started with 1, which was the Control-C we did earlier, and ended with 1. So at least we didn't get any compile errors on our code. So my typing quickly here has managed okay there. If I refresh this page, I now have a new tool at the bottom that says configuration report. If I highlight that, I can click on it, and it comes up with a configuration report that shows a list of the configuration data in GemStone. Looks like I'm not scrolling at the moment, but that shows the the configuration that was defined for the stone. So those are kind of the steps we went through to create a version report, our configuration tool. And if you'd like to add other dashboards that kind of show information for your application, just create a class that answers some JSON, there's examples there, and then create some HTML that displays it. And then you've got something there. So, some JavaScript lessons for a small talker. Some things for me, editing in a text file versus in an image. This is, of course, going the other direction from what most people struggle with when they come to Smalltalk. I'm leaving Smalltalk and having to use the text editor. Some language differences. Assignment is signal equal instead of colon equal, so I find I get typos both in my JavaScript and in my Smalltalk code. The Smalltalk code, of course, doesn't give an error, it just silently does a comparison instead of an assignment. Then JavaScript has not only single equal and double equal for the assignment and comparison, but they have a triple equal, which is their more identity-based comparison. Closures. JavaScript does have the closures, but iterations are a fair bit more complex, just in verboseness. There's something very elegant in Smalltalk of just each, square bracket each, whereas in JavaScript function, it takes 2 arguments and then curly braces for your code. So, but, get used to a little more typing. Scope, curly braces does not provide a scope. This is kind of a gotcha in JavaScript that is mentioned in many articles about people coming to JavaScript. Scoping is a little different. 59 reserved words that can't be used. So in a lot of my Smalltalk code, I just want to know the class of something. I created a temporary variable in a method called class, C-L-A-S-S. But can't do that, so there's the convention of things are often spelled class with a K. K-L-A-S-S is the name of the class that you're keeping track of. And this is actually not very tiny. If you go look at processes, let's see, do I have a way of looking at activity monitor? And so if you go look at Chrome, there are Google Chrome. It has, 100 meg. 36 meg, 115 meg, 26 meg, 20 meg. Okay, so, here I've got, okay, so I'll close that one and let's see if that, has gotten. So now we have 4 processes running for my web browser. And they're taking up 20 to 100 meg. And this is just kind of, as compared to some of, when people talk about Smalltalk is big, it's kind of, well, that's, I'm not sure where all of that is going, but they're using a lot. So future, I'd like to be able to view and set breakpoints in the code browser, show the class hierarchy, more context menus so that there's, more things that you can do directly from the code browser. Statistics is an area that, a lot could be done, and I think that would be valuable, not just the actual viewing, but more of the kind of AI analysis of what should you be interested in about this stat monitor file, and just being able to capture or suggest areas of investigation. So rather than analyzing stat monitor files by hand, let the system do it. Step, edit, continue in the debugger. That's fairly close, but not quite there. there, but like to be able to do more things with inspectors, Monticello. But of course, it's also possible that this is where it will be for a while. This is not officially supported, and it's there in the examples directory, and feedback and contributions are invited. So, before we head into the next presentation, if there's questions or a couple questions, go ahead.
I was wondering why you didn't have a tool browser to create tools.
Yes, that'd be an interesting thing to do. Sure. But
Instead of using those difficult file-based things.
Yes. Yeah, we could try that. Yes.
Well, you produced a class browser in the environment, and Dale did it too.
Yes.
With code.
Yes.
So how would they to each other?
I guess, you can see, if you've seen both, then you could possibly answer that question as well. How are they related to each other? Alan Kay had a comment on pink plane and blue plane, and I don't remember which the colors refer to, but there's one model is making incremental improvements to existing technology, and the other is taking kind of a radical departure. And I am consciously modeling what I'm doing on traditional Smalltalk browser tools. And I think Dale has explicitly said that he's broken free of that paradigm that has locked down the Smalltalk community for 30 years. And did you say that? Am I putting words in your mouth? So I think that would be one way to characterize things, Gary. Yes?
Yeah, just a quick question. So are you able to do all your development using the web tool?
I haven't actually been eating my own dog food much yet, in the sense that the ability to actually save code and edit code is new enough that I haven't been able to do much development in it yet. But now that that's there, I actually do intend to be using it more.
I think you're building a framework.
I am keeping that in mind of what sort of framework would you have, but one of the things that I guess I learned from Ralph Johnson and others is, do not design the framework. Let the framework emerge. So I'm waiting to see what framework emerges from this. And so far, it hasn't revealed itself to me.
So it seems you could use WebTools as a replacement for GemTools. Most of the things traditionally do in GemTools, you can do WebTools. Are there elements for which you have to go back or which you cannot do in WebTools yet?
Well, yes, certainly the Monticello, Metacello stuff is not there. But, that I think would be fairly easy to add. And again, it is certainly aimed at providing something that doesn't have the particular pain point that the Monticello, the Faro tools, Gem tools have, so being very slow with network. Yes?
So all the tools you showed us is stateless?
Yes. But I am not I'm not updating the URL, and I am not actually, you can't copy the URL. I have actually done some investigation of that, and that's something I should add to the future, is I'd like to be able to make a history where you can have bookmarkable URLs and do that.
So is the gem that's talking about JSON, is that quietly updating its view, or have you got some?
Oh, yes, every page that it serves is in a transaction. So every request that it gets, it doesn't abort, updates its view, yes. Yes?
Are you using a JavaScript framework?
I'm using a variety of, things that I've discovered on the web. So Code Mirror is the tool that I'm using for the code editor. And I actually have done my own Smalltalk parser, or extended a Smalltalk parser for that. Things like the graphing I found a package out there called Flop. It's pronounced like plop. And it's, you call it with these things and it draws a graph. So, and then JS tree, is what I'm using for the tree hierarchy. So yes, I'm kind of finding tools out there. It's not as thorough and elegant a single solution as what we've seen in the HR systems demo yesterday of, what's the name of
Thomas calls it
the name of the tool library? The
Smart Client.
Smart Client, yes. So, I made some notes and I plan to investigate that, but, so far this is giving me what I'm looking for.